guys? It's Bro You Whack, and it's finally happening. Blizzard is gonna be bringing back 6v6 in Overwatch 2. Kind of like, okay, look, it is happening, but you're gonna need to watch this whole video in its entirety to find out like what's gonna be happening exactly, why it's happening exactly, because all of this is coming from the latest director's take from Aaron Keller that is over 10 pages long. Oh my god. That's why you're here to watch this video, because I'm gonna give you guys a summary of this 10-page blog post and just also talk about what's gonna happen with 6v6. But before we even get into the future of 6v6, they gave us context as to why they made the changes that they did. And it's not just the 5v5 changes, but rather the 3 major changes that Overwatch experienced. And those 3 changes are hero limits, role queue, and then eventually 5v5, what we're experiencing right now. And Aaron Keller brought up these changes and gave some further context as to why they made these changes to further explain why they even made the change to 5v5 to begin with. And it's all in an effort, it's mainly like a couple of efforts. The first and probably the biggest and common reason as to why they make changes is to improve queue times, and the second is to improve the overall Overwatch experience. In the case of the hero limit change that they made very early on in Overwatch's life in 2016, they wanted to make it so that a composition wasn't just steamrolling through every single other composition. They used the example where it was 1 Winston and 5 Zenyatas, and that 1 Winston just got all the orbs and just absolutely rolled through people. However, when that hero limits change came out, people hated that change, but they learned to adapt and actually learned to appreciate that change. Then a couple years later, here comes another major change in the form of role queue, where you're forced to have 2 tanks, 2 DPS, and 2 support on your team. And once again, people hated that change at first, but they learned to adapt and actually appreciate that change because, oh yeah, it kind of does suck not having a support on your team every single time you play Overwatch. And the last and most recent change to happen to Overwatch is actually when Overwatch 2 shipped out with 5v5, reducing the amount of tanks from 2 tanks to 1 tank. However, after a couple years, we haven't really adapted to these changes. We haven't really learned to appreciate these changes, unlike when role queue came out and when hero limits came out. And so a lot of people have been crying for 6v6 to come back in one way or another. And Aaron Keller and also myself want to contextualize all of these changes throughout the history of Overwatch 2 to lead into what's gonna happen next in regards of 5v5 and 6v6. And this is what Aaron Keller had to say about 6v6. With that said, we're looking at running a series of events to try out different core team composition formats in Overwatch 2. The community has just once or twice suggested a test. Why not put various forms of 6v6 in the game in order to gauge the results? We agree. And based on your feedback, we're exploring how we can test different forms of 6v6 in the game to gauge the results. This has taken some time, however, for reasons that may not be readily apparent. So there we go. That's what's next with 6v6, is having different core team composition formats, that being probably in the form of a quick play hacked mode to test out how this will look, how this will feel, and if people actually like 6v6 or if people are just looking at this through nostalgia glasses. But now you might be wondering, okay, but why can't they just bring back 6v6 tomorrow? Like, if I can make a 6v6 game in custom games, why can't we have it tomorrow, Blizzard? And Aaron Keller actually answered this, and he said the first and honestly largest reason is the need to do this in a way that allows the game to have optimized technical performance. I'm referring to frame rate and memory constraints with 12 players in a match. There have been quite a few upgrades and additions to Overwatch 2 that have an impact on the performance of the game. These range from new features like allied outlines and enabling healer vision by default, and the addition of more technically demanding hero kits, as well as visual upgrades to UI, heroes, and maps. This was kind of the reason that Aaron Keller gave me in private when I asked him, well, why can't you just bring 6v6 as a limited time mode? And it was because it has to run on all these platforms. If this was just a PC game, I'm sure it'd be so easy, but this is running on the Xbox, the PlayStation 5, the PlayStation 4, which came out in 2013, and also the Nintendo Switch, which runs on like a toaster. But Aaron Keller also talked about why it's kind of a little bit more difficult to bring 6v6 back, and it's more of an anxiety rather than a technical difficulty. And it's the idea of queue times, which is just once again a big reason why they make a lot of changes. And one piece of visual data that Aaron Keller provided in this blog post, which I'm very surprised they provided, is this graph of the average competitive role queue times before 5v5 and after 5v5. And you can see the drastic drop for DPS alone from 7.6 minutes all the way to 2.9 minutes when 5v5 shipped out. That is a massive change. And the same change can also be seen with the tank and support, but for DPS, this is probably a reason why they don't want to go back to 6v6, is because they don't want DPS players to experience 7-minute queue times. And I already know there's gonna be tons of people saying, oh, bro, you wack, I will not mind waiting 7 minutes for a game. It's like, no, you will mind. Like, I promise you, if you weren't around Overwatch during the 2020 to 2022 era, these queue times were real. You were waiting 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 plus minutes for a DPS game. And the reason was because nobody wanted to queue up for tank. And this is what I'm just so baffled by, is so many people want to go back to 6v6, but nobody will want to queue up for tank. And you might sit there and say, oh, I want to queue up for tank. Yeah, maybe for like 2 days. But what about afterwards? Nobody will. Like, it's going to be the exact same problem that we had during the COVID era of Overwatch, was these long queue times. And that's the biggest problem that so many people forget about. And while that's undeniable, no one can really argue that, this next part that Aaron Keller also touches on is the struggles of just gameplay in 6v6. Like, do you remember when you would be a tank and you had all the CC abilities all focused on you because you were at the front line? Do you remember when you're a damage hero and you feel like your damage wasn't doing anything because there was double shield blocking all the damage, or just tanks absorbing all of the damage? And do you remember when you would be a support character and you feel like all your heal had to be poured into these two tanks because, well, that's where the most value would be? Yeah, see, a lot of that isn't a fun aspect about 6v6, but people don't ever bring that up because they want 6v6 so bad. And Aaron Keller brings all of this up to try to paint this idea that, look, we gotta pick the lesser of the two evils. And they're gonna test this. Like, they're gonna test the queue times and see if people actually enjoy playing tank in the 6v6 formats when Overwatch 2 is up and running. And they say the outcome of these tests would give us a lot of valuable information to consider moving forward. We'd run the test for a few weeks and gauge interest from the community. Then we'd measure the impact it had on the other experiences in Overwatch 2, like 5v5, arcade, etc. We'd take the lessons from this play test to see what we can learn about the mode within the current game ecosystem and for the future of Overwatch. We would reflect carefully on the learnings from whatever tests we run and explore how to best give players what's being asked for. Whether that's a world of 5v5, 6v6, or even both, is for future us to figure out. Once again, they're just reaffirming the idea that they're probably going to be a quick play hacked 6v6 mode for more than a week, like maybe 2 weeks or something, to really get a lot of data to show like, hey, is this even worth it? But they even go further into trying to figure out what would be best with 6v6 and 5v5 when running experiments. And they say, for instance, we think there could be ways of putting a team together that aren't quite as rigid as a set composition, but not as loose as open queue. And we'll be running at least one quick play hacked based on this idea in season 13. Again, just showing how they're gonna figure out this 5v5 versus 6v6. And in terms of valuable information, that's it from the blog post, because he ended off by saying that this is not gonna be the last time that we talk about 5v5 versus 6v6, just rather the first introduction of trying to figure out what would be best. And that's really Blizzard's main goal when trying to figure out this 5v5 versus 6v6, is trying to figure out the pros and cons of both formats. With 5v5, you obviously have better queue times, but with 6v6, you have a bit more easier time balancing the game because you don't have to focus on just one tank, but rather two tanks where they can kind of take the load off of not only the other tank, but also the other heroes on your team. And I think the data really will show. Like, that graph alone, like, I'm so surprised they brought that, because that really just goes to show how much of an improvement 5v5 is when it comes to queuing up the game. And if Blizzard values queue times more than people on Twitter saying, oh, we need 6v6 back, then they're gonna stick with 5v5, because that is what makes a game better. Just like how limiting what hero can be picked in a game was early on in 2016, just like how it forced people to pick a support when they were in the game, and now possibly with 5v5 limiting it to just one single tank. Again, that's why they brought up these previous changes, is to contextualize, but also show, hey, people hated hated those changes, but they learned to appreciate them over time. And that might be in the case of 5v5, or maybe we're wrong, and after these tests, maybe it turns out 6v6 is better. And I'm so glad Blizzard is doing that, because the previous Blizzard would not have ever tested this out. Blizzard would have just been like, cry some more. Like, we added 5v5 in the game, cry about it. And hopefully we don't have to cry anymore, but I want you guys to cry in the comment section below. What do you want? Do you want 5v5 or do you want 6v6? Let me know. But until then, I love you guys. Thank you guys for watching. More Overwatch 2 videos to come, and bye.